The dust from the departing train still hung in the cold desert air when Granger realized she had been left behind. Her carpetbag clutched uselessly in her trembling hands as the whistle's final wail echoed across the empty Mojave station platform at the stroke of midnight. The red taillight grew smaller and smaller until it vanished completely into the darkness, taking with it her last chance to reach San Francisco before her sister's wedding, before anyone realized she had fled St. Louis with nothing but her mother's pearl necklace and the terrible secret that would ruin her family if it ever came to light. She stood frozen in the November chill of 1883, watching her breath form small clouds in the lamplight, feeling the weight of complete isolation settle over her like a shroud. The station master had already locked up and gone home hours before the midnight train was scheduled to arrive. Deanna had been in the privy when the train pulled in early, and by the time she emerged, straightening her traveling dress and clutching her reticule, the locomotive was already building steam to depart. She had run, her boots pounding against the wooden platform, screaming for them to wait, but the engineer either did not hear her or did not care. Now she stood alone in a town she did not know, in the middle of the California desert, with exactly $17 to her name and nowhere to go until the next eastbound train came through in 3 days. The main street of Mojave stretched before her, dark except for the saloon 2 blocks down where lamplight spilled onto the dirt road and the faint sound of a piano drifted through the night. Deanna had never been inside a saloon. Ladies did not frequent such establishments, and she had been raised to be a lady despite the fact that her father had drunk away their fortune, and her mother had died of shame and consumption when the creditors came calling. She picked up her carpetbag and started walking, each step stirring small clouds of dust that settled on the hem of her traveling dress. The cold deepened as she walked, the desert night air biting through her wool coat. She had not expected California to be cold, but the high desert played by different rules than the green valleys near the coast. Her fingers began to ache where they gripped the carpetbag's leather handle, and she realized with growing panic that she had no plan, no destination, nothing but forward motion to keep the fear at bay. She passed the saloon, keeping her eyes straight ahead even as curious faces turned to look at her through the grimy windows. A woman alone at midnight was either a soiled dove or someone in desperate trouble, and Deanna was beginning to understand she might soon be both if she did not find shelter. She kept walking until the buildings gave way to scattered shacks and then to open desert, and that was when she saw the fire. It flickered orange and warm about 50 yards off the road, a small campfire that promised heat and light in the overwhelming darkness. Deanna stopped, her practical mind warring with her desperate need. Approaching a stranger's camp at midnight was dangerous, possibly fatal, but staying on the road with no coat heavy enough for the dropping temperature was its own kind of death sentence. She stood at the crossroads of her fear and her survival instinct, and then her teeth began to chatter so hard she bit her tongue. The decision made itself. Deanna turned off the road and walked toward the fire, her boots crunching on the rocky ground. As she drew closer, she could make out a figure sitting on a bedroll, a dark hat pulled low, a horse picketed nearby. The man did not stand as she approached, but she could feel his attention on her, watchful and alert in the way of someone who had learned to sleep with one eye open. "I am sorry to disturb you," Deanna called out when she was still 20 feet away, her voice shaking only slightly. "The train left without me, and I have nowhere to go until the next one arrives." The man was silent for a long moment, and Deanna's heart hammered in her chest. Then he reached over and picked up a tin cup, filling it from a pot that sat near the coals. "Fire is free," he said, his voice low and rough. "Coffee too, if you want it." He asked no questions. He did not demand to know her name, her business, or why a respectable woman was wandering alone in the desert at midnight. He simply poured the coffee and set the cup on a flat rock near the fire, then shifted to make room on the opposite side of the flames. Deanna moved forward on trembling legs and sank down onto the cold ground, setting her carpetbag beside her and reaching for the cup with both hands. The coffee was strong and bitter and tasted like salvation. Heat spread through her chest and down into her stomach, and she wrapped her fingers around the warm tin, letting it thaw the ache in her bones. She studied the man across from her through the dancing firelight. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw and eyes that stayed mostly hidden beneath the brim of his hat. His clothes were dusty and worn but well maintained, his gun belt oiled and cared for. A working cowboy, then, not a drifter or an outlaw. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will not impose on your kindness for long, just until I warm up enough to go back to town." "Town is dark," the cowboy said, poking at the fire with a long stick. "Station will not open until 6 in the morning. Hotel keeper will not answer his door for a woman alone at this hour. You would be safer here." Deanna knew he was right, but accepting his offer felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown waters. Her mother had warned her about men and their intentions, about how quickly a woman's reputation could be destroyed, and how society never forgave such falls from grace. But her mother had also never been stranded in the Mojave Desert at midnight with $17 and a secret that could destroy what remained of her family. "I do not even know your name," Deanna said, trying to establish some kind of propriety in this wholly improper situation. "Cole Foster," the cowboy replied. He did not tip his hat or offer his hand, but there was something respectful in the way he kept his distance and his eyes on the fire rather than on her. "Been driving cattle from Texas to California for the past 4 months. Herd got delivered to the rail yard in Barstow yesterday. I am heading back to get my pay and then going home to Montana." "Montana," Deanna said, surprised. "That is quite far from Texas." "I go where the work is," Cole said simply. "Spent the last 3 years following herds. Seen most of the West by now. Still have not seen much that beats Montana sky, though." There was something wistful in his voice when he mentioned Montana, a hint of homesickness that made Deanna's own longing for stability and safety rise up in her throat like a sob. She swallowed it down with another gulp of coffee. "I am Deanna," she said, deliberately leaving off her last name. "I was supposed to be in San Francisco 4 days ago. My sister is getting married." "Supposed to be," Cole repeated, and Deanna heard the question he did not ask. "I had business in St. Louis that delayed me," she said carefully. "Family matters that needed attending to." Cole nodded and did not press further. He pulled his bedroll a little closer to the fire and then stood, moving over to his horse. He untied a second blanket from behind his saddle and brought it back to the fire, holding it out to Deanna. "Gets down to freezing this time of year," he said. "You will want this." Deanna took the blanket, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. Even that brief contact sent a shock of awareness through her, a reminder that she was alone in the desert with a man she did not know, protected only by his sense of honor and her own desperate gamble that he possessed such a thing. "Thank you," she said again, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled of horse and campfire smoke and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. "You are being very kind to a stranger." "West is hard enough without people making it harder on each other," Cole said, settling back onto his bedroll. He adjusted his hat and leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. Get some sleep if you can. I will keep the fire going." Deanna wanted to protest, to insist that she could not possibly sleep in such circumstances, but exhaustion was pulling at her with heavy hands. She had been traveling for 6 days, sleeping in fits and starts on hard train benches, eating whatever she could afford at station stops. Before that, she had spent 2 weeks in St. Louis settling her father's debts and learning the full extent of his betrayal. She was so tired she could barely think straight, and the warmth of the fire combined with the surprising sense of safety she felt in Cole Foster's presence made her eyelids grow heavy. She lay down on the hard ground, using her carpetbag as a pillow and pulling the blanket up to her chin. Above her, the stars wheeled across the sky in glittering profusion, more stars than she had ever seen in her life. The fire crackled softly, and she could hear Cole's steady breathing across from her. Despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and the knowledge that she was utterly ruined if anyone ever found out she had spent the night alone with a strange man in the desert, Diana felt herself slipping toward sleep. "Why did you not ask me any questions?" She whispered into the darkness, not sure if Cole was still awake to hear her. There was a long pause, and then his voice came low and quiet across the fire. "Figured if you wanted to tell me, you would. Figured if you were running from something, it was not my business unless you made it my business. Everyone has a past, Miss Deanna. Not everyone needs to air it out for strangers." Diana closed her eyes, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe fully, like the weight pressing down on her had lifted just enough to let her rest. She did not remember falling asleep, but when she did, she dreamed of wide Montana skies and a pair of steady hands that asked nothing of her, but accepted everything she was willing to give. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and the pale gray light of pre-dawn. For a moment, Deanna could not remember where she was, and then the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up quickly, her hand going to her hair, which had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. Cole was crouched by the fire, tending a small pan where bacon sizzled and popped. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Figured you could use some breakfast before you head back to town." Deanna stood, folding the blanket he had lent her and setting it carefully on the rock where she had spent the night. She felt rumpled and dirty, conscious of how she must look with her hair loose and her dress wrinkled from sleeping on the ground. But Cole still did not look at her directly, giving her the privacy to compose herself as best she could. "The station will not open for another hour," Deanna said, running her fingers through her hair and trying to work out the worst of the tangles. "I should not impose on you further." "Not an imposition," Cole said, dividing the bacon onto 2 tin plates. "Got plenty." They ate in silence as the sun began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The bacon was salty and good, and Diana realized she had not eaten anything since a stale sandwich in Needles the previous afternoon. She cleaned her plate and drank 2 more cups of coffee, feeling strength return to her body if not to her spirits. When the sun finally crested the horizon, flooding the desert with harsh morning light, Cole stood and began packing up his camp. "I will walk you back to the station," he said, rolling his bedroll with practiced efficiency. "Make sure you get settled before I head out." "You do not need to do that," Deanna protested. "You have already done so much." "Rather see you safe," Cole said simply. He swung his saddle onto his horse's back and cinched it tight, then gathered his belongings and kicked dirt over the fire until only cold ashes remained. "Ready." Deanna picked up her carpetbag and nodded. They walked back toward town together, Cole leading his horse and Deanna walking beside him. In the growing light, she could see Mojave more clearly. It was a small railroad town, rough and utilitarian, with nothing beautiful or welcoming about it. But it was civilization of a sort, and Deanna knew she should be grateful to be here, rather than stranded somewhere truly isolated. The station master was just unlocking the door when they arrived. He was a thin man with spectacles and a permanent scowl, and he barely glanced at Deanna as she approached. "Next train west comes through at 4 this afternoon," he said before she could ask. "Ticket will cost you $8 to San Francisco." Deanna opened her reticule and counted out the money, painfully aware of how little remained afterward. The station master handed her a ticket and jerked his thumb toward the waiting room. "You can wait inside," he said. "No food service, no amenities, just benches." Deanna thanked him and turned to find Cole still standing there, his hat in his hands. In the morning light, she could see his face properly for the first time. He had gray-blue eyes and a straight nose and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often but might be beautiful when it did. There was a scar along his jaw, faded white against his tanned skin, and his dark blonde hair needed cutting. He was not handsome in the polished way of the men Deanna had known in St. Louis, but there was something solid and real about him that made her chest ache. "Thank you," she said, knowing the words were inadequate for what he had given her. "I do not know what I would have done without your kindness." "You would have managed," Cole said, and there was something like respect in his voice. "Takes courage to walk up to a stranger's fire at midnight." "Takes courage to let a stranger share that fire," Deanna replied. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, and Deanna felt something pass between them, some recognition or connection that had nothing to do with the practical matter of fire and coffee and blankets. She wanted to ask him things, wanted to know about his life and his dreams and why he was heading back to Montana. She wanted to tell him about her father's gambling debts and the awful man in St. Louis who had offered to pay them all off if Deanna would become his mistress, and how she had fled in the night rather than accept either ruin or that particular salvation. She wanted to tell him that she was terrified of what waited for her in San Francisco, terrified that her sister would see through her excuses and her brave face to the desperation underneath. But the station master was watching them through the window with suspicious eyes, and Deanna knew that every moment she stood here talking to Cole was another mark against her reputation. So she simply held out her hand, and Cole took it, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "Safe travels," he said quietly. "I hope your sister's wedding is everything you want it to be." "Safe travels to you as well," Deanna managed. "I hope Montana is as beautiful as you remember." Cole released her hand and put his hat back on, then swung up into his saddle with easy grace. He touched the brim in a gesture of farewell, and Deanna watched him ride away down the main street of Mojave until he disappeared around a corner. Only then did she turn and walk into the station waiting room, settling onto a hard wooden bench to wait out the next 8 hours. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Deanna tried to read a book she had brought with her, but the words swam before her eyes. She kept thinking about Cole Foster, about the way he had asked no questions and expected nothing in return for his kindness. She kept remembering the sound of his voice in the darkness, and the way his eyes had looked in the morning light. It was ridiculous to feel this way about a man she had known for less than 12 hours, ridiculous to feel like something important had slipped through her fingers when he rode away. At 3:30, the westbound train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a hiss of steam. Deanna gathered her carpetbag and joined the handful of other passengers boarding for San Francisco. She found a seat by the window and pressed her forehead against the glass, watching Mojave recede into the distance. Somewhere out there, Cole Foster was riding toward Barstow to collect his pay before heading north to Montana. Their paths had crossed for one night in the desert, and now they would never cross again. That was simply how life worked. Deanna closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for San Francisco, for her sister Eleanor's questions and concerns, for the wedding and the pretense that everything was fine. She would have to lie, would have to smile and say that yes, she was just delayed, that no, nothing was wrong, that of course their father was well and sent his love. Eleanor did not know that their father had died 3 months ago in a rooming house in St. Louis, drunk and alone and buried in a pauper's grave because there was no money left for anything better. Eleanor did not know about the debts or the creditors or the horrible proposition Diana had fled. And if Diana had anything to say about it, Eleanor would never know. Her sister deserved one perfect day, one beautiful wedding where she could be happy and hopeful about the future. Diana would give her that, no matter what it cost. The train rattled westward through the afternoon and into the evening. Diana dozed fitfully, waking at each station stop to see new passengers board and old ones depart. Night fell, and the conductor came through lighting the lamps. Diana stared out the window at her own reflection, seeing a young woman with shadows under her eyes and worry lines beginning to form between her brows. She was only 22 years old, but she felt ancient, worn down by responsibility and fear. They reached San Francisco just after midnight, pulling into the grand station with its vaulted ceilings and echoing spaces. Diana climbed down from the train and looked around, searching the crowd for her sister's familiar face. Eleanor had sent a telegram saying she would meet Diana at the station regardless of when she arrived, but Diana saw no sign of her. She waited on the platform as other passengers were greeted by family and friends, as the crowd thinned and the station grew quiet. Finally, a young man approached her, well-dressed and polite. "Miss Granger, I am William Hartley, Eleanor's fiancé. I am afraid Eleanor is quite ill. She was up all night with worry about your arrival and exhausted herself. I have a carriage waiting to take you to our apartment." Diana felt a stab of guilt. "Is she all right? Should I have sent another telegram?" "She will be fine with rest," William assured her. "She simply wore herself out with concern for you. Come, let us get you settled." William Hartley proved to be kind and solicitous, helping Diana into the carriage and making polite conversation during the drive through San Francisco's dark streets. The apartment he shared with his mother was in a respectable neighborhood, a 3-story building with gas lamps outside and clean windows. William's mother, a stern woman named Mrs. Hartley, greeted Diana at the door with cool courtesy and showed her to a small guest room where Eleanor lay sleeping, her face pale against the pillows. "She has been quite worried about you," Mrs. Hartley said, her tone making it clear that she blamed Diana for this worry. "I hope whatever detained you was worth the distress it caused." Diana bit back a sharp reply and simply nodded. Mrs. Hartley left, and Diana sank onto the edge of the bed, looking at her sister's sleeping face. Eleanor was 3 years older than Diana, but she had always been the gentle one, the sweet one, the one who needed protecting. Their father had doted on her, had sheltered her from the worst of his drinking and gambling. Diana had been the one who managed the household, who dealt with creditors, who learned to stretch a dollar and make excuses. Even now, even in sleep, Eleanor looked peaceful and innocent, untroubled by the harsh realities Diana had been shielding her from. Diana undressed quietly and climbed into the bed beside her sister, careful not to wake her. But as soon as she lay down, Eleanor stirred and reached out, finding Diana's hand in the darkness. "You are here," Eleanor whispered. "I was so worried." "I am here," Deanna confirmed, squeezing her sister's hand. "Go back to sleep. We can talk in the morning." "I missed you," Alina murmured, already drifting off again. "I am so glad you came." Deanna lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything and nothing. She thought about her father and the mess he had left behind. She thought about the man in St. Louis and how close she had come to accepting his offer. She thought about the train that had left without her and the cowboy who had asked no questions. Most of all, she thought about Cole Foster and wondered where he was sleeping tonight, whether he was thinking about her at all or whether she had already faded from his memory like smoke from a campfire. The next morning, Deanna woke to find Alina sitting up in bed, watching her with concerned eyes. In the daylight, Deanna could see that her sister looked tired and thin, her face drawn with worry. "Tell me everything," Alina said without preamble. "Tell me why you are 2 weeks late and why you look like you have not slept in a month." Deanna had prepared her lies carefully, had practiced them during the long train ride. But looking into her sister's eyes, she found she could not speak them. Instead, she said, "Father is dead." Alina went very still. "What? He died 3 months ago," Deanna continued, the words spilling out now that she had started. "I did not tell you because I did not want to ruin your happiness. He died in St. Louis and there was no money left for a proper funeral." "There was no money left for anything. He gambled it all away, Alina. Everything Mother left us, everything we had. I spent the last 2 months trying to settle his debts and I could not do it. There is nothing left." Alina stared at her, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why did you not tell me? Why did you handle this alone?" "Because you were planning your wedding," Deanna said fiercely. "Because you finally found someone good who loves you, and I was not going to let Father's failures take that away from you. You deserve to be happy, Alina. You deserve a beautiful wedding and a good life." "And what about you?" Alina demanded. "What about your happiness? Your life?" Deanna had no answer for that. She sat in silence while Alina cried, and eventually her sister reached out and pulled her close, holding her tight while they both wept for the father they had lost and the innocence that had died with him. The next few days passed in a blur of wedding preparations and tearful conversations. William proved to be a better man than Deanna had dared to hope, taking the news of their father's death and the family's financial situation with grace and promising to help however he could. Mrs. Hartley was less understanding, viewing Deanna as a potential burden and making it clear that she expected Alina's new family to take precedence over old obligations. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday afternoon in a small church near Golden Gate Park. Alina looked beautiful in a cream-colored dress, and William looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever spoken. Deanna stood beside her sister as maid of honor, smiling through her tears and meaning every word of the traditional blessings she spoke. This was what she had wanted, what she had sacrificed everything to preserve. Alina's happiness made it all worthwhile. At the reception afterward, Deanna found herself standing alone by a window, watching the other guests dance and laugh. She was happy for her sister, truly happy. But she could not shake the feeling that she was watching life from the outside, that everyone else knew some secret about how to move forward while she remained frozen in place. "You look like you could use some fresh air," a voice said beside her, and Deanna turned to find a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an expensive dress. "I am Mrs. Charlotte Brennan. I am a friend of Mrs. Hartley's, though I confess we do not see eye to eye on much." Deanna introduced herself, and Mrs. Brennan smiled. "The sister. Yes, I have heard all about you. Mrs. Hartley seems to think you are going to be a burden on the happy couple, but I do not see it that way at all." "I do not intend to be a burden," Deanna said stiffly. "Of course you do not, Mrs. Brennan agreed. You look like a young woman who could manage just about anything if given half a chance. Tell me, Miss Granger, what are your plans now that your sister is married? Diana had been avoiding this question, but Mrs. Brennan's direct gaze demanded an honest answer. I do not know, she admitted. I do not have many options. Then perhaps you will consider working for me, Mrs. Brennan said. I run a boarding house for young women on Nob Hill. I also coordinate employment for women of good character who need respectable work. I am always looking for intelligent, capable women to help me manage the business. The pay is modest but fair, and you would have room and board included. Deanna stared at her. You are offering me a position. You do not even know me. I know you well enough, Mrs. Brennan said. I know you traveled across the country to be here for your sister's wedding despite having recently lost your father. I know you kept that loss secret to protect her happiness. And I know from the look in your eyes that you have been managing difficult situations for a long time. That is the kind of woman I want working with me. It was an answer to a prayer Deanna had not even known how to speak. She accepted on the spot, and when she told Alina later that evening, her sister cried again, but this time from relief and happiness. I was so worried about what would happen to you, Alina said. I could not bear the thought of you being unhappy while I was starting my new life. I will be fine, Deanna assured her. Better than fine. This is a good opportunity. And it was. Over the next 3 months, Diana threw herself into her new work with determination. She helped manage the boarding house, interviewed prospective tenants, and assisted Mrs. Brennan in placing women in various positions around the city. It was demanding work, but Diana found she enjoyed it. She enjoyed having a purpose, enjoyed being useful, enjoyed the small apartment she had all to herself on the 3rd floor of the boarding house. But despite her busy days and her newfound independence, Diana could not stop thinking about Cole Foster. She thought about him at odd moments, when she was falling asleep at night or eating breakfast in the morning. She thought about his gray-blue eyes and the way he had poured her coffee without asking questions. She thought about Montana and wondered if he had made it home, if he was happy, if he ever thought about the woman he had helped in the Mojave Desert. It was foolish to dwell on a man she had known for only a few hours, foolish to construct elaborate fantasies about someone who had probably forgotten her as soon as he rode out of sight. But Deanna could not help herself. In her memory, that night by the fire had taken on an almost mythical quality, a moment of perfect kindness and connection in the middle of chaos and fear. She knew she was romanticizing it, knew she was creating something larger than what had actually existed, but she could not seem to stop. Winter turned to spring, and Diana settled into her new life. She attended Alina's Sunday dinners and endured Mrs. Hartley's barely concealed disdain. She helped Mrs. Brennan expand the boarding house business and took on more responsibilities. She saved every penny she could, building a small nest egg that made her feel secure for the first time in years. She was, by any reasonable measure, doing well, but she was not happy. Contentment eluded her, slipping away like water through her fingers every time she thought she had grasped it. She felt like she was waiting for something, though she could not have said what. She felt incomplete, as though some essential part of herself had been left behind in the desert and could never be recovered. On a warm afternoon in late April, Diana was in the boarding house parlor reviewing applications when Mrs. Brennan came in with an odd expression on her face. "There is a gentleman here to see you," she said. "A Mr. Cole Foster. He says you met in Mojave several months ago." Deanna's heart stopped. She looked up at Mrs. Brennan, certain she had misheard. "Cole Foster is here. Now." "In the front hall," Mrs. Brennan confirmed, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Quite a handsome young man, though he looks a bit worse for wear. Should I send him in?" Deanna stood so quickly she knocked over her chair. Yes, please, send him in. She had 30 seconds to compose herself before Cole walked through the parlor door, hat in hand and dirt on his boots. He looked exactly as she remembered and completely different all at once. His face was thinner, his clothes more worn, and there was something weary in his expression that had not been there before. But his eyes were the same, gray-blue and steady, and when they met hers, Deanna felt something shift inside her chest, like a key turning in a lock. "Miss Deanna," Cole said, his voice rough, "I apologize for showing up unannounced. I know this is irregular." "How did you find me?" Deanna managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was not easy," Cole admitted. "Took me a while to track down someone who knew a Deanna from St. Louis who had come to San Francisco for her sister's wedding. Then I had to find your sister, and she told me you were working here. I hope I am not intruding." "You are not," Deanna said quickly. "Please sit down. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water?" Cole sat in the chair across from her, setting his hat on his knee. "I am fine, thank you. I just need to talk to you." Deanna sat back down, her hands gripping the arms of her chair to keep them from shaking. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I am alive," Cole said, which was not exactly an answer. "Made it back to Barstow, collected my pay. Started heading north toward Montana like I planned. Got as far as Sacramento before I realized I could not do it." "Could not go home?" Deanna asked, confused. "Could not leave California without seeing you again," Cole said, his eyes locked on hers. "I know that sounds crazy. I know we only spent one night together and we barely talked, and you probably think I am insane for coming here. But I have not been able to stop thinking about you. I have ridden 500 miles trying to get you out of my head, and it has not worked. So I figured the only thing to do was come back and see if I imagined the whole thing, or if you felt it too." Diana could not breathe. She stared at him, at this man who had ridden 500 miles because he could not stop thinking about her, and she felt tears prick her eyes. "I felt it too," she whispered. "I have been thinking about you every day since Mojave. I thought I was losing my mind." Cole's whole body seemed to sag with relief. "Thank God. I was afraid I had built the whole thing up in my head, made it into something it was not." "What was it?" Deanna asked. "What happened that night?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. "I have been on my own for a long time," he finally said. "Been moving from place to place, following work, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I convinced myself that was what I wanted, that I liked the freedom of it. But when you walked up to my fire that night, when you sat down across from me looking scared and brave all at once, something clicked into place. I looked at you and thought, there she is, like I had been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for." Deanna felt tears spill down her cheeks. "That is exactly how I felt, like I recognized you even though we had never met." "So what do we do now?" Cole asked, and there was something vulnerable in his voice, something that made Deanna want to reach across the space between them and take his hand. "I do not know," Deanna said honestly. "This is all so fast, we barely know each other." "Then let us get to know each other," Cole said. "I am not asking you to run away with me tomorrow, I am just asking for a chance. Let me stay in San Francisco for a while, let me court you properly. And if, after you get to know me, you decide I am not what you want, I will accept that and go on my way. But I had to try, Deanna. I had to know if this was real." Deanna knew she should be cautious. She should tell him to leave, that she needed time, that she could not afford to take chances on romantic notions. But looking into Cole's eyes, she found she did not want to be cautious. She wanted to be brave the way she had been brave that night in the desert. She wanted to walk toward the fire and see what happened. "Stay," she said. "Court me properly. Let us see if this is real." Cole smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face, and Deanna understood why God had invented smiling in the first place. It was to create moments like this, moments of pure joy and possibility. Over the next weeks, Cole became a fixture in Diana's life. He found work at the docks, loading and unloading ships, hard labor that paid enough to rent a room in a boarding house across town. He called on Diana every Sunday afternoon, and they would walk through Golden Gate Park or along the waterfront, talking about everything and nothing. Deanna learned about his childhood in Montana, about his parents who had died when he was 16, about the ranch he had left behind when he went looking for work. Cole learned about her father's gambling and her mother's death, about the debts in St. Louis and the proposition she had fled. They shared their histories like precious gifts, trusting each other with the broken pieces of their pasts. Leaner approved of Cole immediately, declaring him exactly the sort of steady, honest man Deanna needed. William was more cautious, but he warmed up after a few conversations revealed Cole's intelligence and ambition. Even Mrs. Brennan gave her blessing, telling Diana that she had good instincts and should trust them. Mrs. Hartley, predictably, disapproved. She made pointed comments about cowboys and their lack of prospects, about Deanna's tendency to make impulsive decisions, about the scandal of a young woman being courted by a man so far below her station. Deanna ignored her, secure in the knowledge that her station was no higher than Cole's, and that love cared nothing for social conventions anyway. As spring turned to summer, Diana and Cole grew closer. They shared their first kiss on a fog-shrouded evening in June, standing on a bluff overlooking the ocean. It was awkward and sweet and perfect, and when they pulled apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers and said, "I love you. I think I have loved you since that night in Mojave." "I love you too," Deanna whispered back, and it was the truest thing she had ever said. In July, Cole proposed. He did not have a ring yet, could not afford the kind of diamond Diana deserved, but he got down on one knee in Mrs. Brennan's parlor and asked her to be his wife with such earnest sincerity that Diana did not even notice the absence of jewelry. She said yes immediately, and they set a date for September, giving them enough time to save money and make plans. Cole had bigger dreams than working the docks forever. He wanted to return to Montana, to reclaim the ranch his parents had left him and build a life there. Deanna had never imagined herself as a rancher's wife, but the more Cole talked about Montana's big sky and open spaces, the more she found herself wanting to see it. She wanted to build something with him, wanted to create a home and a future that belonged to them and no one else. They married on a clear September day in the same church where Leaner and William had wed. Deanna wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Brennan had helped her sew, and Cole wore a new suit that made him look handsome and slightly uncomfortable. Leaner cried through the whole ceremony, and William had to lend Cole a handkerchief because Cole's eyes were not entirely dry either. After the wedding, there was a small reception at the boarding house. Mrs. Brennan had prepared a feast, and the other residents of the house all attended, making toasts and offering advice. Even Mrs. Hartley managed to say something vaguely pleasant, though her expression suggested it pained her to do so. As the sun set and the party wound down, Diana and Cole slipped away to the small apartment they had rented on the edge of the city. It was tiny, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. That night, as they lay together in their narrow bed, Cole traced the line of Diana's jaw with his finger and said, "I still cannot believe you are real. I keep thinking I am going to wake up back in that desert and find out this was all a dream." "If it is a dream, we are having it together," Deanna said, curling closer to him, "and I do not want to wake up." They spent the fall and winter saving every penny they could, working long hours and living frugally. Deanna continued helping Mrs. Brennan while Cole took every extra shift available at the docks. By the time spring came around again, they had enough money to buy train tickets to Montana and supplies to start rebuilding the ranch. The journey north was long and exhausting, but also joyful. Deanna watched the landscape change outside the train windows, from California's golden hills to Oregon's green forests to Montana's vast plains, and felt her heart expand with each passing mile. When they finally arrived at the tiny town closest to Cole's family ranch, Deanna stepped off the train and took her first breath of Montana air. It smelled like grass and freedom and home. The ranch was in worse shape than Cole had hoped, but better than he had feared. The house was still standing, though it needed extensive repairs. The barn had partially collapsed, and the fences were down in several places. But the land was good, and there was water, and Cole looked at it all with such love and determination that Deanna knew they would make it work. They spent that first summer rebuilding. Deanna learned to cook on a wood stove and tend a vegetable garden and mend fences. Cole worked from dawn to dusk, repairing the house and barn, breaking horses and building up a small herd of cattle. It was the hardest work Deanna had ever done, and there were days when she was so tired she wanted to cry. But there were also evenings when she and Cole would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and she would feel a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes for entirely different reasons. That fall, Deanna discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole on a crisp October evening, and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. They spent the winter preparing for the baby, Cole building a cradle from wood he had salvaged from the old barn, and Deanna sewing tiny clothes from fabric she had carefully saved. Their son was born in early May during a spring storm. The local midwife attended the birth, and Cole held Deanna's hand through every contraction, his face pale but determined. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Cole cried harder than Deanna had ever seen him cry. They named him Charles, after Cole's father, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray-blue eyes. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm. Deanna had never imagined she could be happy living so far from civilization, but she found a deep satisfaction in the simple routines of ranch life. She loved watching Cole teach Charles to ride when he was barely old enough to walk. She loved the community they built with neighboring ranchers, the barn dances and church socials and shared harvests. She loved the way Cole still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, even after years of marriage and hard work, and the exhaustion that came with raising children. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Dorothy 3 years after Charles, and another son named Daniel 2 years after that. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, improved the house, built a proper barn. Cole became known as an honest rancher and a fair dealer. Deanna became known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. Eleanor and William visited twice, making the long journey from San Francisco to see Deanna's new life. Eleanor was amazed at how capable her sister had become, at how comfortable she seemed in this rough country so far from the refinements of city life. But Deanna could honestly say she had never been happier. She had found something in Montana that she had never known she was looking for. A sense of belonging, of purpose, of being exactly where she was meant to be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Deanna back to the spot where they had first met. It took some planning, a long train journey back to California, and then a ride out into the desert near Mojave. The town had grown some in the intervening years, but the desert itself was unchanged. They found the approximate location of Cole's camp that midnight 10 years ago, and they built a small fire as the sun set. "You remember what you said to me that night?" Deanna asked, sitting close to Cole as they watched the flames dance. "I said fire is free," Cole replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Coffee too." "You asked no questions," Deanna said softly. "You just let me be there, let me be safe. Do you know how much that meant, how much it still means?" "I was not being noble," Cole said. "I just looked at you and knew you were important, knew I needed to take care of you even if I did not understand why." "Do you understand now?" Deanna asked. Cole turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I understand that everything in my life led me to that campfire. Every choice, every job, every mile I rode, it all brought me to the exact right place at the exact right time to meet you. That is not coincidence, that is fate." "I do not believe in fate," Deanna said, but she was smiling. "Then call it luck," Cole said. "Call it whatever you want. But I know that train leaving without you was the best thing that ever happened to me." Deanna leaned her head on his shoulder and watched the fire burn low. "The best thing that ever happened to both of us," she agreed. They stayed there until the fire died completely, talking about the past and the present and the future. They talked about their children and the ranch and their dreams for the years ahead. And when the last ember faded to ash, they rode back to Mojave and caught the train north, back to Montana, and the life they had built together. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Charles grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament and his mother in intelligence. Dorothy was spirited and independent, always asking questions and pushing boundaries. Daniel was the peacemaker, gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for understanding people. Deanna and Cole raised them with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and honesty and kindness. When Charles was 16, he announced he wanted to study medicine. It was a shock, expecting him to take over the ranch, but Cole and Deanna supported his decision. They sent him to school in Helena, scraping together the tuition by selling part of their herd. Dorothy, to everyone's surprise, loved ranching and declared she would stay and help run the operation. Daniel discovered a talent for writing and began submitting stories to magazines back east. Deanna and Cole adapted to each change, learning to let their children find their own paths while remaining a steady presence in their lives. The ranch continued to prosper under Dorothy's enthusiastic management. Charles became a respected doctor who returned to Montana to serve the rural communities that desperately needed medical care. Daniel published his first novel at 25, dedicating it to his parents who had taught him that any life was possible if you worked hard enough. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Deanna with a trip back to San Francisco. Eleanor was now a grandmother herself, and she hosted a party for Deanna and Cole that brought together friends from both of their lives. Mrs. Brennan, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, toasted the couple and reminded everyone that she had known from the moment she saw Cole waiting in the front hall that he was the right man for Deanna. But the highlight of the trip was when Cole took Deanna to a jeweler and finally bought her the engagement ring he had never been able to afford 25 years earlier. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious, but when he slipped it on her finger, Deanna cried the way she had cried on their wedding day. "You did not need to do this," she said through her tears. "I never minded not having a ring." "I know," Cole said, "but I minded. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that shows the world how much you mean to me." "You show me that every day," Deanna said, but she kissed him and admired the ring and wore it with pride. They returned to Montana, to their ranch and their daughter and the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. The years continued their steady march, bringing grandchildren and gray hair and the occasional ache that came with aging bodies. But through it all, Diana and Cole remained as connected as they had been that first night by the fire in the Mojave Desert. When Cole was 65, he had a mild heart attack while working in the barn. The doctor, their own son Charles, ordered him to slow down and take things easier. Cole grumbled but obeyed, handing over more of the ranch work to Dorothy and her husband. He and Diana spent more time sitting on the porch, watching the Montana sky change colors and talking about everything and nothing. "You have any regrets?" Diana asked him one evening when the sunset was particularly spectacular. Cole thought about it for a long moment. "I regret not finding you sooner," he finally said. "I regret all those years I spent wandering around thinking I did not need anyone. But I do not regret anything that happened after that night in Mojave. Every moment with you has been exactly what I wanted my life to be." "Even the hard parts?" Diana asked. "The years when we barely had enough money to eat, the times when the cattle died or the crops failed." "Especially those parts," Cole said firmly, "because we faced them together, because you never gave up, never stopped fighting for our life. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Diana Foster." Diana took his hand, her wedding band and engagement ring glinting in the fading light. "We made each other strong," she said. "Neither of us could have done this alone." "Good thing we did not have to," Cole agreed. They lived another 20 years in contentment and peace. They saw their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. They celebrated Charles's success as a doctor, Dorothy's expansion of the ranch into one of the most prosperous in the region, and Daniel's growing fame as an author. They hosted Christmas dinners and summer barbecues and anniversary parties. They grew old together, their hands becoming wrinkled and spotted but still fitting together perfectly. Cole died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, lying next to Diana in the bed they had shared for nearly 60 years. Diana woke to find him gone, and though she knew he had lived a long and full life, the grief nearly broke her. For weeks, she could barely function, moving through the days in a fog of loss. But gradually, supported by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Diana found her way back to living. She stayed on the ranch, in the house Cole had rebuilt with his own hands, surrounded by the life they had created together. She spent her days working in her garden, reading Daniel's books, and telling stories to anyone who would listen about the cowboy, who had shared his fire and asked no questions. On what would have been their 65th wedding anniversary, Diana's family gathered at the ranch for a celebration of Cole's life and their enduring love. Charles, now in his 60s and gray-haired, stood to make a toast. "My father once told me that the best decision he ever made was to share his campfire with a stranger," Charles said, his voice thick with emotion. "He said that one act of kindness changed his entire life, gave him everything he had ever wanted but had not known how to ask for. And my mother, she always said that the worst thing that ever happened to her, that train leaving without her in Mojave, turned out to be the best thing because it brought her to Dad. They taught us that love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about showing up, about being there, about choosing each other every single day. They did that for 60 years, and they taught all of us how to do the same." Diana listened with tears streaming down her face, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Cole had created. She thought about that night in the desert, about how terrified and alone she had felt, about how Cole had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak. She thought about all the years since, about the joy and struggle and everyday miracles that had made up their life together. When the party ended and everyone had gone home, Deanna sat alone on the porch and watched the sun set over the Montana mountains. She could almost feel Cole beside her, his presence so strong it was like he had never left. And in that moment, Deanna understood that love did not end with death. It transformed, became something different but no less real. Cole was gone, but what they had built together remained. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had saved, in the community they had served, in every life they had touched. Deanna lived to be 93 years old, alert and engaged right up until the end. She died on a warm summer evening, sitting in her favorite rocking chair on the porch, a book open in her lap and a smile on her face. Her children found her there in the morning, peaceful and still, and they knew she had gone to find Cole again. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, Diana Foster, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She walked toward the fire and found home. At the funeral, Dorothy told the story one more time for the youngest great-grandchildren who had never heard it. She told them about the train that left without Deanna at midnight, about the cowboy who offered his fire and asked no questions, about how one moment of kindness and courage had created a love story that spanned 6 decades and touched countless lives. Remember this, Dorothy told the children, her voice strong despite her tears. Remember that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. Remember that one act of kindness can change everything. And remember that real love, the kind that lasts, is built on small choices made every single day to show up, to be present, to take care of each other. That is what Grandma and Grandpa taught us. That is their legacy. The sun set over the Montana mountains that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, the same colors Deanna had watched from that porch for more than 60 years. And if you had been standing there listening carefully, you might have heard the echo of laughter carried on the wind, the sound of 2 souls reunited at last, dancing together under that big Montana sky they had both loved so much. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that had begun on a cold desert night in Mojave, California. And every year, on the anniversary of that night, the family would gather and build a fire, and someone would tell the story one more time. The story of how the train left without her at midnight, how a cowboy offered his fire and asked no questions, and how that single moment of grace created a love that would echo through the generations for all time.